Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare. Thank you. ज्ञानतिमिरान्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मिलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। श्रीचैतन्यमनोभीष्टं स्थापितं येन भूतले स्वयं रूपा कदा मह्यं ददाति स्वपदान्तिकम्।
Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunathanvitam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padan Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakhanvitamscha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Pranamami Hari Priye Namo Mahavadanyaya Krishna Prema Pradhayate Krishnaya Krishna Chaitanya Namne Gaura Dushe Namaha Vanchakalpa Tarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya Evacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Chapter 6 is broken into 5 sections. Verses 1 through to 9. These verses describe the qualification for the higher echelons of basically the path to elevation. Echelons means levels. Higher echelons of the path to perfection, which are the final stages of Ashtanga Yoga. Then in 23 verses from 10:2 to 32, the process, or the final stages are also called Dhyana Yoga, which is the title of this chapter. From 10 through to 32, the process of Dhyana Yoga is described. And in this section, the verses don't necessarily go sequentially. Rather, they describe a path to perfection, and then they describe some elements of sadhana, then they describe perfection again, and then they describe some elements of sadhana. So you will see some toing and froing in this section here. Higher echelons. Echelon means level. Levels. From 33 through to 36, 4 verses, you have Arjuna's question, or Arjuna's concern rather, regarding the difficulty of the stage of perfection being described. Sorry about the slanting writing. He is concerned that the stage of perfection seems to be too far for him to understand or achieve. And Arjuna addresses that question. From text 37 through to text 45, this is Arjuna's concern, or Arjuna's concern regarding a practitioner destination if he does not perfect his practice. And text 46 through to 47, I'm just going to write it above here. Krishna glorifies yoga and describes the best of all yogas as pure bhakti and the best of all yogis as being the pure devotee. So you can see that by the end of the 6th chapter, the path of perfection to impersonal liberation is fully described. And after describing this path, Krishna begins to describe how the actual purpose of yoga, which is connection to him, is best performed through pure bhakti. He elevates the discussion considerably from 647. And that is the first clear, unambiguous reference to pure devotional service in the Bhagavad Gita. There are other verses which can be understood in the light of pure devotional service. This is the first clear reference that universally refers to pure devotional service, directly. And it begins the context of the middle 6 chapters that describe the path of surrender that leads to pure bhakti.
What's the second one? Krishna glorifies? Is that
Where Krishna glorifies yoga and describes the best of all yogas as being pure bhakti and the best of all yogis as being the pure devotee. Is this clear? Okay. Now, we finished off chapter 5. Can I leave this here or can I flip the board? Huh? He described, we ended chapter 5 in verse 26 last week. We had 27 to 29 remaining to go. Now this last section of the 5th chapter refers to the process of Ashtanga Yoga, or the process rather of the higher stages of Ashtanga Yoga, Dhyana Yoga. Now the question arises, when is this actually taken up? Remember, we have 8 stages to the process of Ashtanga Yoga. Can anybody list them? Okay, the first 2. Yep.
and then there's asana and pranayama,
Yep. And then?
pratyahara,
Yep.
dharana, dhyana, samadhi.
Yep. So you have pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. Now, does one need to be spiritually elevated in order to perform these elements of Ashtanga Yoga? Well, not really. A lot of this we do in our day-to-day practice also. So as a Nishkama Karma Yogi, these elements are generally a part of their practice. You see even with Dhruva Maharaj, when he went to the forest in the 4th canto, it is described that he very quickly, using the process of yoga, withdrew his senses and began to meditate on Krishna. So that is described in the 4th canto, which means that generally practitioners had an idea of asana, pranayama, even from the very beginning stages of their life. It's not that they would reach the stage of detachment partial detachment from material life, purification of heart, and then have to sit learning asana and pranayama. That's not generally how it would work. Now, if you also go to chapter 4, this is spoken of. If you go to chapter 4, text number 29. Now remember, this section speaks about different types of karma yoga. So the translation says, still others who are inclined to the process of breath restraint to remain in trance, practice by offering the movement of the outgoing breath into the incoming and the incoming breath into the outgoing, and thus at last remain in trance, stopping all breathing. So this describes these initial stages up to the perfection of pranayama. What happens afterwards is called dhyana yoga, and that's generally taken up after one gives up all prescribed duties. Now, so far, Krishna has spoken of generally never giving up prescribed duties. When does the stage come when one actually gives up prescribed duties? Because as a liberated soul, at some stage, prescribed duties have to be given up, right? Because these duties connect to the body. At some stage, the body drops. This is when it happens. It happens when the performance of prescribed duties becomes an obstacle. So when prescribed duties become an obstacle, to perfecting one's practice, only then are prescribed duties given up. In the beginning of the 5th chapter, Arjuna had actually asked this question: if I don't need to perform prescribed duties anymore, should I give it up? And Krishna said no. It is when one is, and an analogy for this is, suppose one is working and at the same time cultivating devotional service. At some stage, one doesn't need to work anymore, not just because one is financially secure, but also because that inclination, that the material identity that forces us to a particular type of work has been purified enough by devotional service. And we can happily just perform devotional services connected to the temple, to Srila Prabhupada's movement, etc. And at that stage, if prescribed duties are not an obstacle, one doesn't necessarily just stop, taking care of family or, going to functions or going to work. It is when, as one begins to increase one's service, when going to work becomes an obstacle to continuously increasing one's devotional service. At that point, one slowly gives up one's work and increases one's service until at some point one decides one doesn't need to work anymore. So when one's devotional service reaches that level of intensity. You will also notice at the stage of Bhava Bhakti, because it is at the stage of Asakti that one first gets a glimpse of one's spiritual identity. In either one's in vision, or the spiritual master appears in one's dream, or the spiritual master in person speaks of one's eternal identity in connection with Krishna. Now, that is cultivated in the stage of bhava in more specific detail. And at this stage, sometimes devotees find that they need a little bit of isolation in order to cultivate that eternal identity in service to Krishna. At that elevated level, you will find that they retire to a solitary place and they chant Hare Krishna continuously. We've had a few devotees in the movement who have done that. One example is His Holiness Gaur Govinda Swami from Orissa. And at some stage when he was described that for 3 days or for a long duration of time, he just sat in one place, no food, no water, and he was just chanting. It's not an artificially achieved stage, but rather by just chanting, one is actively developing one's relationship with Krishna. At that level, giving up one's external duties makes sense, but not until then. For Gaur Govinda Maharaj, those particular services were at that point not the best thing for him to cultivate his relationship with Krishna. And it's exactly the same with the perfection of dhyana yoga. They realize at some stage that they now need to absorb their mind in meditation on Paramatma, on his form directly. And that form of meditation requires an isolated place. It requires, specific type of environment for them to be able to perfect their practice. And at that point, working wherever they work with their family, being disturbed all the time is not conducive. At that point, they may choose to leave. So,
is there a prescribed age in...
No. You can do it, it's a question of spiritual advancement. So you have yogis like, for example, Gyaneshwar. Gyaneshwar did something like this from a very young age. Or you can get yogis who've been practicing their whole life, but don't yet reach this stage. The reality is that to get to this level, where one can focus on this part, it generally already takes many lifetimes, perhaps even hundreds of lifetimes, as one gradually is purifying one's nature. What tends to happen is that if one, for example, is born in the modes of passion and ignorance, typically a Vaishya type background, one, by performing prescribed duties and offering them to Krishna, gradually purifies one's nature, and one goes from passion and ignorance to passion, to goodness, and then as one keeps cultivating goodness, at some stage, the higher echelons become possible. And that's usually the transition of many lifetimes.
So, in India, how we say that once you get into a vanaprastha stage, you start doing this?
Not necessarily. Even with sannyas, for example, there are 4 levels of sannyas.
No.
Oh, there are 4 levels of sannyas. That is as follows. Prabhupada speaks about this. The first one is Kuta. The second stage is Bahutaka. Third stage is Parivrajacharya. And the fourth stage is Paramahamsa. So, because initially if one is in family life, even if one is in vanaprastha life, generally one is still used to having one's wife or some connection with family. And it's very hard to suddenly just give up a companion in that way. So, Parivrajacharya, like we say, Namo Vishnupada and Om Vishnupada Paramahamsa Parivrajacharya, Ashtotara, etc. So we use the word Paramahamsa and Parivrajacharya to glorify Srila Prabhupada and Srila Bhaktisiddhanta in those glorification mantras. So so what happens at the Kuta stage is, when one is taking sannyas, rather than just leave one's family to never see them again, one in the same town stays in a purified place, like a temple or something. And the family still brings one prasad. So in that way, one is still connected to them, but one is living separately and cultivating the ability to serve Krishna independent of one's family. In Bahutaka, one no longer accepts prasad from the family, but one may stay in the same town and beg food from people within that town and sustain oneself.
With the person's companion?
With the person's?
Companion.
No. This is all sannyas.
So not with...
No. One's wife is not involved. So one's wife in the Kuta stage, one's wife may cook, and the children or someone may deliver the prasad. So it's a gradual form of detaching oneself. So in Bahudaka, one will go and take prasad from people in the town. At the stage of Parivrajacharya, this means a traveling preacher. So this person is sufficiently absorbed in Krishna, and most importantly, he has developed the sense that Krishna is in my heart and is in everybody's heart. He understands from his previous 2 practices that I don't need to depend on family for my livelihood. I don't need to depend on people I know for livelihood. Rather, it is Krishna who's in everybody's heart, who will give me what I need, who will protect me. If a thug comes and kills me somewhere, then that is Krishna's desire, and they accept it in that way. In the Narada Muni pastime, in the 5th and 6th chapters of the 1st canto, does anybody remember Narada Muni was walking through various villages and hills as he was going? Yeah. So Prabhupada actually comments in one of those purports. He says that this is the duty of every sannyasi. He says that a traveling mendicant must keep in Krishna in their heart, understanding that they're never alone, wander throughout the world and experience the world. What they experience is Krishna's shelter everywhere, and they learn to see Krishna as being everywhere around them. They learn to see every experience that they are perhaps accustomed to from a Krishna conscious point of view. And they get this understanding: I've been everywhere, I've seen everything. There's nothing in this world that's worth it. It's only Krishna that one need aspire for.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. And that is the stage of the Parivrajaka. When one is sufficiently absorbed in this understanding that I don't need anyone but Krishna, there's nothing in the world that's worth it. At that stage, the stage of Paramahamsa becomes possible. In the stage of Paramahamsa, one sits in a place and continuously chants Hare Krishna or strongly cultivates the 9 items of bhakti. So Prabhupada actually has spoken about this in several of his lectures, and he speaks about how these stages evolve from one to another. Prabhupada said for himself, he would always want to travel and preach. But he told his disciples, at some stage, when you have sufficiently preached, and you can sit in one place and chant Hare Krishna, then you may retire to Mayapur or Vrindavan and just chant Hare Krishna. That is what Prabhupada said. So to your original question, at the stage of Vanaprastha, would one practice this? Not necessarily. It depends on one's stage of advancement. See, the way the ashramas work is this. Paramahamsa is a stage where one has sufficiently cultivated realization that I only need Krishna. Krishna is, nothing in this material world is worth it, and the only thing that matters is one's relationship with Krishna. He sits in one place and continuously serves the Lord. So for example, you have the example of Madhavendra Puri. So Madhavendra Puri never begged for prasadam anywhere. He would sit in one place, what came of its own accord by Krishna's arrangement, he would accept it. Anything else, he wouldn't accept it. The practice of a Parivrajaka is that they would go and beg in a few houses. Whatever they get, they accept. If they don't get anything, they don't take anything. Parivrajaka is still dealing outwards with society, whereas the Paramahamsa tends to be more inward focused. Another example of this is in the 7th canto of Bhagavatam, when you have Dattatreya. So this comes in the pastime of the Python man. So that's actually Dattatreya. And he was just lying in the form of a snake, Ajagaravriti. And whatever he got, naturally, he would take. And when Prahlad Maharaj saw him, it so happened that he had received a lot recently. So he was rather plump. But otherwise, he wouldn't take anything. No, that's not a good example. The word Paramahamsa is misused in that context.
Sorry, what context was that?
There's someone who was a worshipper of Kali, who became very famous in India for his particular brand of philosophy. In India, he's titled a Paramahamsa, but that is a mistaken label. The external form of the ashram is. But sannyasa, the word sannyas, and we will see this in the beginning of the 6th chapter, really means stopping the senses from engaging with the sense objects. That's what sannyasa means. So the actual, internal form of sannyas is possible for everybody. But the external dress of a sannyasi, because of the certain duties that sannyasis perform, that is kind of roaming without protection, it is considered not to be suitable for a soul who's in the dress of a female body. But it's not an obstacle for their advancement. And the example of this is Kapila Dev in the 3rd canto of Bhagavatam. Not Kapila Dev, Devahuti in the 3rd canto of Bhagavatam. After being instructed by Kapila Dev, she had completely resolved to achieving perfection. Of course, as a mother of the Lord, she was already in that sense perfected. But she stayed within an opulent palace. And if you look at the palace, it was more opulent than what even kings would have. It was pillars of coral or Vaidurya gems and very extensive baths, etc. But she never actually was there just to relish the pleasure of those conveniences. It was the home of her husband. He had already left after taking sannyas. She just continued to stay there. And she strongly cultivated her spiritual practice.
What's the name of the husband?
Kardama Muni. Kardama.
So Prabhu, in this sense, is the Python yoga, or someone who just lays around and waiting for prasad, and that's not recommended at all. But Madhavendra Puri was actually engaging in so much service and just waiting for the super soul in someone's heart to reciprocate, and then he would only take prasad in that instance. Is that the correct way of looking at it?
Well, Dattatreya, the Python man, was also similarly absorbed. It's just that he was more like a jnana yogi, actually. But his mood was also that, it's the Lord who ultimately sends everything. So he was absorbed in his own form of meditation on the Lord. In Jnana Yogis, they would meditate, for example, on the Vishvarupa form of the Lord, or they would have a sense of, they would meditate on the fact that the Lord is spiritual by nature, and I'm also spiritual like Him, with phrases like Tattvamasi or Aham Brahmasmi. But they're also absorbed in the Lord, just not as personally. But yes, without that meditation, even what Dattatreya did is impossible. The same thing you actually see in the 5th canto with Rishabdev. So Rishabdev actually appeared to lay out the duties of a Paramahamsa. And so for himself, he would just lie in one place, accept whatever came, and he would take his own stool so people would leave him alone and smear it all over his body. So this it's not a sadhana. It was the manifestation of his internal mood of absorption in the Lord. So that's always the case.
So there's a Srimad Bhagavatam verse behind you, which actually says self-controlled persons who are attached to the Supreme Lord all of a sudden give up the world, material attachments.
That's a little bit different. What this refers to is absorption in the Lord at a particular level, which necessitates a certain level of isolation. So that's what we're talking about in these verses. And Mataji's question about the varnashrama system and whether one starts at the vanaprastha stage, the answer was not necessarily. What this verse describes is that a devotee's taste in hearing and chanting is so strong, and this happens at the stage of Bhava Bhakti actually, that by hearing and chanting one is able to transcend all of one's material circumstances immediately. So Parikshit Maharaj was actually initially, if you like, when he received the message, he was overcome with remorse, but then he quickly absorbed himself in hearing and chanting, and then forgot everything else. And in the 10th canto Bhagavatam, he tells Sukadeva Goswami, please keep hearing and please keep telling me about Krishna, because if you stop, I will be overwhelmed with fear, with hunger, with thirst and sleep. All my bodily functions will overwhelm me again. But as long as you keep hearing and chanting, as long as you keep helping me hear and chant, I won't experience material life anymore. And this is best explained by the verse in Bhagavad Gita 4.11. Vitaraga bhaya krodha manmaya mam upashita bahavo jnana tapasa puta madbhavam agata. That when one develops such deep appreciation of Krishna, this comes right after Janma Karma Chame Divyam. So when one develops such deep appreciation of Krishna's pastimes, that one is able to give up raga, attachment, krodha, anger, bhaya, fear, and puta madbhava maga. One is able to absorb oneself in Krishna. One can develop bhava, love for him. So that is what this verse says. It's not exactly the context here. Was your question answered? Prabhu, you had a question? You raised your hand? You forgot. Sorry. Okay. Any other questions here?
It's just very brief. Do you think maybe that it says it's not advisable for someone in a woman's body because you're a bit vulnerable? All the one, like if you're wandering around and like you said, you're living without sort of shelter and protection. Do you think it's maybe because like, a woman is a bit more vulnerable in the world?
Well, the example of that is, Vedavati. Vedavati was actually Sita, according to the Shastras. Yeah. So she was performing tapasya to achieve the Lord as her husband. And she was alone in the forest, and of course she was a young, extremely beautiful lady. Ravana saw her and he desired her immediately. He asked her, "Oh beautiful maiden, whom do you belong to? Why are you here?" He was asking, "Who's your husband?" As if he wouldn't care anyway, he wanted her. And she said, "I'm here worshipping the Lord to achieve him as my husband. Please don't come near me." And when he understood that she would not succumb to him, he forcibly touched her. I think he caught her by her hair, actually. And Vedavati instantly, I think by her mystic power, she turned her hand into a sword and she cut her hair off. And then she said, "You wretch, because my body has been polluted by you, I will no longer maintain this body to achieve the Lord. In another form, I will be the cause of your destruction." And she turned herself into a lotus flower and then swept away. I think she actually burned herself. She immolated her body. But then I think from the ashes came a lotus flower, and from that lotus flower, I think came, she went into a field, and then that's how Sita appeared in this world.
Thank you.
That's okay.
So just wanted to ask, it's like going, as you said, like when somebody goes ahead in the path of Bhakti Yoga, then ultimately one has to leave work. So is it correct? Can somebody not maintain a balance?
At our stage, it is necessary. But what we are speaking of is, for example, you're working now, I assume. So you're working now, and you're obviously practicing devotional service. But what happens as you move towards the Vanaprastha stage is that you gradually develop consistently increasing service, or increasingly you increase your portfolio of service. And by the time you reach 45, 50, 60, are you going to keep working? At that age, what tends to happen is you will gradually, and you can't just give up working because you've been working your whole life. Your mind has been set in a particular way. But if throughout the 30, 40 years of your work life, you've been constantly developing a taste for hearing and chanting, and your shelter has become your portfolio of services, then as you perhaps reach 45, 50, 55, as my parents have done, they now work part-time. And they continue to increase their service. So they moved recently from staying far away from the temple, which is about 40 kilometers away. They stay in Melbourne. They now stay pretty much, I think, 2 minutes distance away from the temple. They can hold their breath and walk to the temple. But they are serving like morning, evening, most days. I try and call them, they don't pick up their phone. But at some stage, it becomes like, okay, now finances are not an issue. Now it's just about service, and now my life is service. You don't, at that stage, wake up because you have to go to work or take care of the family. You wake up because you want to go to Mangalarti. You want to go and serve Radha Vallabha, Radha Gopinath. You want to chant your rounds with the devotees. You want to attend Bhagavatam. You want to spread Srila Prabhupada's movement. That's why you're waking up. At that stage, it's very, very natural. You'd feel like, okay, I don't need to work anymore. I just want to engage in devotional service. Now, when that is cultivated, you'll be fully absorbed in temple services, and as you're absorbed in temple services, internally you are cultivating a sense of relationship with Krishna. Initially, in the mood of being a servant, but then at a particular stage, it becomes more and more specific. When that specific nature of one's service becomes fully focused, one begins to seek out an environment where one can cultivate that nature. At that stage, even temple services, particular temple services, for example, going out and talking to people, that may or may not be the best in those circumstances. But Krishna will guide one at that point. Is that okay? So at our stage, we actually do need a balance. Neither can we be fully absorbed in temple services, and of course we can't go back and just work for Krishna's pleasure. Yeah.
Prescribed duties to change over to, it happens itself?
No, it's a cultivation. So if one, and this often is a question devotees have, I can work 30, 40 years, and the question is, I've been practicing Krishna consciousness also for that time. I've been chanting Hare Krishna, I've been attending temple classes. What is next for me? But through the process of cultivating devotional service, the key here is that sense of developing one's relationship with Krishna. That is the target when one is performing service. Just like when an archer is shooting an arrow, similarly the target when one is serving in the temple, when one is chanting one's rounds, is this mood of developing one's relationship with Krishna. I'm chanting, I'm not just chanting, I'm not just counting. I am associating with Krishna by hearing his holy names. I'm hearing Srimad Bhagavatam with a sense of hearing his message. What makes devotional service so relishable is the sense of associating with Krishna. And as that association with Krishna, that one's taste increases by Krishna's grace, as that taste increases, one's material identification is completely destroyed. And so then the balance automatically shifts. So what actually determines the nature of the balance is the extent to which we identify as being a servant of Krishna and the extent to which our material identity is destroyed. And of course, by performing devotional service, that happens. But devotional service with intent, with the desire to please, with the desire to develop a relationship with Krishna is much more powerful. The threshold of bhakti, so I just need to rub this off. If this is bhakti, this threshold is the intention to please. This is devotional activities, and in some sense, until the desire to please is strong, or until the desire to please is manifest, please let this be pleasing to you, that is when bhakti actually begins. Now the purity of that intention to please, so here you have pure bhakti. The purity of that intention to please without wanting anything for oneself, that is how pure devotional service is defined. If one is performing activities somewhat mechanically, that is not yet, that doesn't fully encompass what bhakti is. It's devotional service with the intention to please. Any other questions? So you'll find that we go through chapter 6 quite quickly. Okay, let's start with chapter 5, verse number 26, 27, where we left off. So now this is the stage where prescribed duties are an obstacle to completely meditating on the form of the Lord within the heart, which is the path to perfection. Text 27 and 28. Sparshan kritva bahibhayam chakshus jaivantare bhruvoh pranapanav samau kritva nasabhyantara charino yatendriya manobuddhir munir moksha parayanaha vikate cha bhaya krodho ya sada mukta eva saha. Translation.
Shutting out all external sense objects, keeping the eyes and vision concentrated between the two eyebrows, suspending the inward and outward breaths within the nostrils, and thus controlling the mind, senses, and intelligence, the transcendentalist aiming at liberation becomes free from desire, fear, and anger. One who is always in this state is certainly liberated.
So if you look at the words of the verse itself, sparshan kritva bahir bhayam. So sparshan here means touch. It's an indication for all the senses touching the sense objects. So all of this, bahibhayams, it is thrown externally. Basically, any contact of the senses with the sense objects is stopped. Chakshus chaivantare bhruvu. Chakshus means a sense of sight. The sense of sight is focused in between the eyebrows. Prana panau samau kritva. The prana and apana vayus are held in equilibrium. Nasa bhyantare charino. Yatendriya mano buddhir. Keeping one's senses, mind and intelligence focused. Munir, this practitioner, moksha parayana, whose aim is liberation. What is the term for devotees? Narayana parayana. Their aim is Narayana. Their aim is the relationship with Krishna. This individual is moksha parayana, and of course they serve the Lord for the purpose of moksha. Vigata, giving up, ichcha, desire, bhaya, fear, krodha, anger. Ya sada mukta eva saha. So one who, through this practice, is gradually able to come to this stage, is able to transcend all the states of their mind, ichcha, bhaya, and krodha. They're constantly on the platform of liberation. Where have we heard these three words before? Ichcha, bhaya, krodha? Vita, raga, bhaya, krodha. Which verse was that? 4.11. 4.11. 10? Oh, sorry, my mistake. Sorry, 4.10. So, Vita, Raga, Bhaya, Krodha. So, you will see these three words come up again and again. Raga, Bhaya, Krodha, Ichcha, Krodha, Ichcha, Bhaya, Krodha. The same thing. These refer to conditions of the mind, or in Sanskrit terminology, vrittis, like certain waves or harmonic patterns of the mind, you can say, of the conditioned mind. Transcending those patterns is the sign of liberation, basically. Yoga is defined as yoga chitta vritti nirodha, destroying these patterns of the mind, which is categorized in these three categories. The devotee, described in 4.10, does it by strong hearing and chanting about Krishna. The yogi does it this way. So Srila Prabhupada writes in the purport, being engaged in Krishna consciousness, so Prabhupada is speaking about the devotee. One can immediately understand one's spiritual identity, and then one can understand the Supreme Lord by means of devotional service. When one is well situated in devotional service, one comes to the transcendental platform, qualified to feel the presence of the Lord in the sphere of one's activity. This particular position is called liberation in the Supreme. After explaining the above principles of liberation in the Supreme, so Prabhupada is now going to speak about another topic in the matter of liberation. The Lord gives instruction to Arjuna as to how one can come to that position by the practice of the mysticism or yoga known as Ashtanga Yoga, which is divisible into an eightfold procedure called Yama, Niyama, Asana, Pranayama, Pratyahara, Dharana, Dhyana, and Samadhi. In the 6th chapter, the subject of yoga is explicitly detailed, and at the end of the 5th, it is only preliminarily explained. One has to drive out the sense objects, sparshan kritva bahir. So bahir means outside. One has to drive off the sense objects such as sound, touch, form, taste, and smell by the pratyahara process in yoga. So we start with the 5th stage. That's where it's starting. And then keep the vision of the eyes between the two eyebrows and concentrate on the tip of the nose with half-closed lids. There is no benefit in closing the eyes altogether, because then there is every chance of falling asleep. Nor is there benefit in opening the eyes completely, because then there is the hazard of being attracted by sense objects. The breathing movement is restrained within the nostrils by neutralizing the up-moving, the prana, and down-moving, apana, air within the body. By practice of such yoga, one is able to gain control over the senses, refrain from outward sense objects, and prepare oneself for liberation in the Supreme. So the process of, breathing in and out and equalizing the breath, remember we spoke of that as being at the pranayama stage as a precursor to pratyahara. That's what's being described. And of course, Prabhupada says this is not necessary for a devotee. The last sentence, a Krishna-conscious person, however, being always engaged in devotional service, does not risk losing his senses to some other engagement. This is a better way of controlling the senses than by Ashtanga Yoga. Text 29. Bhoktaram yagya tapasam sarvaloka maheshwaram suhridam sarvabhutanam nyatvam mam shantim richati. So it's always this verse, the importance of this verse is in saying that the Lord is essential to meditate upon regardless of whether one is a karmi, jnani or yogi. Bhoktaram yagya tapasam. The Lord is enjoyer of yagya performances, born of prescribed duties. So the platform of the karma yogi. He's also the enjoyer of tapasa, the austerities of the jnani. And he is the Lord of all the planets, Sarva Loka Maheshwaram, which is achieved by the practice of yoga. So the practitioner, knowing that Krishna is enjoyer of one's activities, that the Lord should be offered these activities, any form of meditation and jnana should be focused on the Lord, and the yogi also needs to meditate on the Lord. Suhridam sarva bhutanam, that refers to the devotees. Jnatva mam shantim richati. These different practitioners can achieve the path of perfection. That is described. Translation.
Person in full consciousness of me, knowing me to be the ultimate beneficiary of all sacrifices and austerities, the Supreme Lord of all planets and demigods, and the benefactor and well-wisher of all living entities, attains peace from the pangs of material misery.
So, Prabhupada actually, you know what Prabhupada would call this verse? The peace formula. So this verse is very famous as the peace formula. So the way Prabhupada would explain this verse is as follows. He would say that when people understand that Krishna is the actual enjoyer, Bhoktaram, and that he is the Lord of everyone and everything, Sarva Loka Maheshwaram, and that he is the well-wisher of every living entity. Knowing this, one can be completely secure. One doesn't have to fight for scarce resources. One knows that everything is actually intended for Krishna, and he's going to supply everything that everyone needs as one needs it. Knowing this, Nyatva Mam, knowing this, Shantim Richati, this person can achieve peace. So Prabhupada would say if the world wants peace, they need to recognize the Lord as being the proprietor, the enjoyer, and the friend of all living entities. That was Prabhupada's explanation of this verse. And so this is how Prabhupada explains it. The conditioned souls within the clutches of the illusory energy are all anxious to attain peace in the material world, but they do not know the formula for peace, which is explained in this part of the Bhagavad Gita. The greatest peace formula is simply this. Lord Krishna is the beneficiary in all human activities. Men should offer everything to the transcendental service of the Lord, because he is the proprietor of all planets and the demigods thereon. No one is greater than he. Further down, Prabhupada says, unless one understands these bare facts, it is not possible to achieve peace in the world, either individually or collectively. This is the sense of Krishna consciousness. Lord Krishna is a supreme predominator, and all living entities, including the great demigods, are his subordinates. One can attain perfect peace only in complete Krishna consciousness. It's actually really interesting. There's in the Christian tradition, there's a very strong focus on grace. Does anyone know what I mean by that? Well, before you eat anything, you say grace. Before you do anything or you accept anything, you accept whatever you get or the situation that one has as being the Lord's grace. And actually, Christian preachers are very, very strong in this principle. I remember I was arguing with a Christian neighbor of mine. I was maybe about 19 or something, and I was quite pig-headed. But he was speaking about the statement, actually I brought up the topic rather, that that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the light, and no one goes to God except through him. So I brought up that statement, and I wanted to start an argument. So I started talking to him about this, and he was just very peacefully explaining, what he was a very nice guy. And, at the end of the conversation, he said, look, Abhishek, I don't know very much, but all throughout our conversation, I was just praying that may my words be made fit for your understanding by my Lord. And more than that, I can't do anything else. As soon as he said that, I felt like a complete idiot. I had been, I have the best philosophy, and I had been studying the Bhagavad Gita. I would take it and, hit someone over the head with it. That's how I used to gain faith. I'd go pick arguments so that I could understand that our philosophy was the best. But after that, I began to understand that actually that's not how one practices the philosophy. His simple realization of seeing everything as being the mercy of the Lord was actually a far, far more important realization than what I had with all the knowledge that I'd acquired. If one is able to appreciate everything the Lord gives, appreciate it as being the gift of the Lord, that gratitude that comes is the precursor to engaging things in Krishna's service. Appreciation, gratitude, and service follow in that line. And so what this verse says is one has to appreciate Krishna as being the proprietor, the enjoyer, therefore the giver of everything. He's also the well-wisher of every living entity. He's the one who cares for us and gives us everything. And if we can accept whatever he gives with gratitude, that forms the very beginning and the foundation, the foundational mood with which we can serve Krishna properly.
So what were the three? Appreciation, gratitude?
Appreciation, gratitude, and service. It follows in that spirit. And with respect to dealing with the things that we have, appreciation and gratitude are essential. It is really easy to feel like, why don't I have the best wife or best husband? Why don't I have, and even, I've caught myself doing this. How come, with the job choices that I've made, how come I don't have a better career? How come I don't have more money? How come this devotee has so much? We went down the same path. He's so much better off. But these emotions actually don't allow us to see everything as being the gift of the Lord. With whatever we get, whatever situation we have, if we are able to accept it as the gift of the Lord, and we are able to therefore be satisfied with it, that this is the best thing for me that the Lord is personally providing, and the Lord will take care of me. I don't need anything more. One can actually be happy. There are even actually, many years ago, I happened to read an article, and this was by a famous actress, and she was describing how when she was in her 20s, of course, her form was much more youthful and beautiful than when she was much older. But she described how when she was younger, there was always in her mind a sense of competition, because she was among other similarly beautiful people. And she always felt, I'm not good enough, there's this fault and that fault, and she was always dissatisfied. But later on, as she grew in wisdom and she had her family, her happiness was elsewhere, she was able to accept herself for what she was. And that sense of just, this is it, and it doesn't matter what I have, it matters how I use it. If that is the understanding, then one can be happy no matter what situation one has. The example that is given is that of a kitchen. You can have a simple coal kitchen in a village somewhere, or you can have an elaborate kitchen somewhere, like a 5-star kitchen. What matters more, of course, having more facilities, you can do a lot more. But if one is an expert in cooking, one can produce wonderful foodstuffs even from a very simple kitchen. So it is not so much about what we have, it's about how we use what we have. This instruction also comes very strongly in the Mahabharata. When Yudhishthira Maharaj lost everything and he was being sent to the forest, at that point Yudhishthira Maharaj, all the brahmanas practically of Hastinapur, they followed the Pandavas, and their intention was, we will come with you and we will support you by narrating the pastimes of the Lord and giving you instructions from the scriptures. When Yudhishthira Maharaj heard this intention of the brahmanas, he just, nothing, up to that point, he had not shed a tear. But at that point, he completely broke down and he began to cry uncontrollably. And he was saying, previously when we had our own kingdom and riches, we could serve so opulently. Now I'm taking you all with me and I'm unable to support you. One of the brahmanas came to Yudhishthira Maharaj and said, O king, your mentality is not good for you. You're thinking that wealth and or position or some opulence is the only way by which you can serve. And if you think with that mentality, then you will always be more focused on getting that opulence rather than the principle of service. We are sages. We have grown up in the forest, and we are very happy with fruits and roots and whatever we can easily obtain. You don't have to worry about our maintenance. We will just sit and we will hear and chant about Krishna, and we will be perfectly satisfied with that also. So according to our circumstance, if we learn to be satisfied with what we have and see the opportunities that Krishna has given us in our circumstance, we can not only be satisfied, but we can actually genuinely be really happy by engaging what we have in Krishna's service. That's the explanation of this verse. And that's what Prabhupada would emphasize throughout his lectures. Okay, so now Dhyana Yoga. Again, remember we have 5 sections. As described here. So in the first 2 verses of the 6th chapter, Krishna will again glorify Nishkama Karma Yoga as being equal to Jnana Yoga and Ashtanga Yoga. This is what he will say. Shri Bhagavan Vacha. Together. Anashrita karma phalam karyam karma karoti yaha sa sannyasi cha yogi cha niradnir cha na kriya. Translation.
Supreme Personality of Godhead said, one who is unattached to the teachings work, and his work is his knowledge, is it the renounced order, and he is his invisible, not he who lights no fire and falls no teachings.
So, that person who works without taking shelter of the fruits of the activity. Ashrita means fruit. Anashrita means ashrita means shelter. Anashrita means without shelter. So he does not take shelter in karma phalam, in the fruit of the activity. Karyam karma karoti ya. He performs that activity as obligated. Sa sannyasi, that person is a sannyasi. He is equal to that person. Sannyasi here means that person who does not engage his senses with the sense objects. He is equal to that sannyasi or the jnana yogi. Cha yogi. A yogi is one who has stopped his internal desire for sense enjoyment. So sannyasi refers to someone who is externally stopping his senses, but the only way you can continue to do that is if you internally stop the desires. Yogi, one who internally stops the desires. So a yogi automatically then stops engaging the senses with their object. And the person who works as he's obligated, he is equal to the jnana yogi and the ashtanga yogi. That's what's described in this verse. Not someone who na niragnir, one who doesn't light any fire, in other words, sannyasi, and kriya, he doesn't perform any specific practices of ashtanga yoga. One who just doesn't do anything, he's not actually a yogi, a sannyasi, or a proper practitioner. Okay, text 2. Yam sannyasam iti prahur yogam tam vidi pandava nahi asanyasta sankalpo yogi bhavati kaschana. Translation.
What is called renunciation you should know to be the same as yoga, or linking one's consult with the Supreme. O son of Pandu, for one can never become a yogi unless he renounces the desire for sense gratification.
So this verse actually is a description or an explanation of the previous verse. So what is being described here is asanyasta sankalpo, one who has not given up the sankalpa, the desire to enjoy in this world, can neither become a yogi or a sannyasi. But because the Nishkama Karma Yogi has given up the desire to enjoy in this world, that giving up of the desire makes him equal to a yogi and a sannyasi, even if he doesn't work. So that was what was described. Now text 3 describes the state of giving up these prescribed duties. So the first two verses have described that prescribed duties are equal to yoga and sannyasa, or jnana yoga and dhyana yoga. But at some stage, Krishna will say, it becomes an obstacle to further development. And that's text 3. Arurukshur muner yogam karma karanamuchyate yoga ruddhasya tasyaiva shama karanamuchyate. Translation.
For one who is a neophyte in the eightfold yoga system, Lord is said to be the means, and for one who is already elevated in yoga, cessation of all material activities is said to be the means.
So note the two phrases, Arurukshur and Yoga Ruddhasya. Can I rub this off?
Yes.
Go on.
Giving up of prescribed duties is equal to yoga and sannyasa.
Oh, thank you.
Jnana yoga, right? What you're referring to.
Yes. And sannyasa there refers to the practice of jnana yoga. Thank you. Jnana yoga. Thank you so much.
Yes, no problem.
So the phrases that are important here are Arurukshu, which means aspiring to achieve, and Yoga Ruddha, or which means having achieved the stage of yoga or the qualification. So Arurukshur Muner Yoga, of the person who is still in the very beginning stages of this whole process, for them, karma karanam uchyate. The reason for their advancement, the cause for their advancement, karanam, is their prescribed duties offered to Krishna. For somebody who has achieved the stage of purification of heart and is finalizing that stage of practice, yoga rudasya, for that person, shama karanam uchyate. At that point, ceasing one's material activities is the cause, karanam, for further advancement. So Prabhupada writes in the purport, concerning the eightfold yoga system, attempts in the beginning to enter into meditation through regulative principles of life and practice of, what does that mean? Regulative principles of life? Yama niyama. Into meditation through regulative principles of life and practice of different sitting postures, which is asana, are considered fruitive material activities, karma. All such activities lead to achieving perfect mental equilibrium to control the senses. When one is accomplished, so this perfect mental equilibrium is the description of shama in this verse. When one is accomplished in the practice of meditation, he ceases all disturbing mental activities. And of course, Srila Prabhupada says, a Krishna-conscious person, however, is situated from the beginning on the platform of meditation because he always thinks of Krishna. And being constantly engaged in the service of Krishna, he is considered to have ceased. Hare Krishna? Sorry, can you go through that door if that's okay? He is considered to have ceased all material activities. So Prabhupada is saying it doesn't apply for a devotee. Now, the qualification for someone who is at the Yoga Ruddha stage is being described. Text 4. Yada hinendriyarteshu na karmashu vanusajjate sarva sankalpa sannyasi yoga ruddhastadochyate. Translation.
A person is said to be elevated in yoga when, having renounced all material desires, he neither acts for sense gratification nor engages in fruitive activities.
So at that time, yada indriya arteshu, when in the objects of the senses he is no longer engaged, na karmasuv anusajjate, he is not necessarily engaged in activities to enjoy his senses. Sarva sankalpa sannyasi, he has given up the very desire to enjoy. Yoga rudas tadochyate, that stage, uchyate means it's called yoga rudas. So Prabhupada actually applies this to the stage of bhakti, and we spoke about this with what happens to a devotee through their process of advancement. Here's what Prabhupada says. When a person is fully engaged in the transcendental loving service of the Lord, he is pleased in himself, and thus he is no longer engaged in sense gratification or in fruitive activities. Otherwise, one must be engaged in sense gratification, since one cannot live without engagement. Further down, but a Krishna-conscious person can do everything for the satisfaction of Krishna and thereby be perfectly detached from sense gratification. One who has no such realization must mechanically try to escape material desires. Mechanically, Prabhupada here is referring to the process of Nishkama Karma Yoga, before being elevated to the top rung of the yoga ladder. And one part of performing Nishkama Karma Yoga is, of course, Yama, Niyama, Asana, and Pranayama. Text 5. So text 5 and text 6 describe the process by which one can achieve this realization. Uddared atmanatmanam natmanam avasadayed atmaiva hi atmano bandhur atmaiva ripuratmanaha. Translation.
One must deliver himself with the help of his mind, and not degrade himself. The mind is the friend of the conditioned soul and his enemy as well.
So one's mind engaged with the desire to enjoy can very easily cause one to just continue in this world. Which verses that we've studied so far, 2nd and 3rd chapter, describe this? Any verses that people can remember or recall? Comes in the last section of the 3rd chapter, based on Arjuna's question. What was Arjuna's question at the end of the 3rd chapter? What is it, O Krishna, that impels one to sinful activities as if by force, for even a man of discrimination? And then what was Krishna's answer? Kama esha, krodha esha. So when one's mindset is focused on enjoying in this world, then that desire to enjoy, born of the mode of passion, very quickly distracts one from any kind of spiritual activity, and it causes one to perform sinful activities even by force. What about the 2nd chapter? Text 62, 63. Dhyayeto vishayan pumsa sangasteshu pajayate sangat sanjayate kama kama krodha bijayate. So meditating on sense objects causes what? Desire first. Sangasteshu pajayate sangat sanjayate kama. So kama arises. From that kama, the desire to remove obstacles to get that sense object arises. From that desire comes what? Krodhat bhavati sammoha. You forget what should be done, what should not be done. Sammoha means confusion about what is right and wrong. From that confusion arises smriti. One forgets one's determination that I wanted to chant today, I wanted to read something today, and one just goes on to the mood of enjoyment. And when one loses one's determination, what happens? One falls again into this world. One heads back down into this world. So the determination to leave this world, the determination, that sankalpa, that my life is meant for Krishna's service, I am on this path, that determination is the wealth of a devotee. And that is what is being cultivated through the practice of sadhana bhakti, an increasing determination to achieve Krishna's service. So when the mind is directed towards Krishna conscious activities, and one is engaged in devotional service, through one's mind which is absorbed in service, through one's mind which is absorbed in hearing and chanting about Krishna, one can deliver oneself. If one's mind is engaged in hearing and reading other things, if one's mind is focused on associating with those who desire other things, with that same mind, one can fall down. And that's explained in the next verse. So udared means one must deliver. Atmana, Atma can mean mind, because Atma means self. So the self can be understood at different levels. Atma can mean body, or senses even. Atma can mean the body, the mind. It can sometimes even mean the intelligence, or it can mean Paramatma. But here, udared Atmana Atmanam. One must deliver oneself, Atma, by Atma, the mind. Na Atmanam avasadayet. The conditioned soul must be careful not to degrade himself by that very same mind. Atmaiva hi Atmano bandhur. For the conditioned soul, the Atma can be a friend, or the same Atma, for oneself, Atma, can be an enemy. That is described in this verse. So Prabhupada in the purport writes, the word Atma denotes body, mind and soul, depending on different circumstances. In the yoga system, the mind and the conditioned soul are especially important. So in the yoga system, Atma is usually used to refer to the mind and the soul. Since the mind is the central point of yoga practice, Atma refers here to the mind. The purpose of the yoga system is to control the mind and draw it away from attachment to sense objects. It is stressed herein that the mind must be so trained that it can deliver the conditioned soul from the maya of nescience. Further down, Prabhupada says, therefore, the mind should be trained so that it will not be attracted by the glitter of material nature, and in this way the conditioned soul may be saved. One should not degrade oneself by attraction to sense objects. The more one is attracted to sense objects, the more one becomes entangled in material existence. By the way, what is the function of the mind?
Accepting and rejecting?
Yes. How does the mind accept something or reject something? On what basis?
Based on conditioning and past impressions, like samskaras.
Very good. And based on that conditioning, of course, desires come to the mind. But past impressions. So remember, there are four components of the subtle body: the mind, the intelligence, the ahankar, and the chitta. The chitta is a repository of all contaminated past impressions, all material impressions. So yes, from those past impressions, desires come up. But the mind can still choose to accept or reject them. Sometimes, a desire comes to our mind and we choose to reject it. A desire comes to our mind, we choose to accept it. What allows us to accept or reject some of those desires? No, not always. If, as a conditioned soul, I can just think, I want so-and-so thing, and my intelligence says, no, actually, you should be studying. Don't just run off and do something else. You have exams coming up. But I think, no, it's okay. Then my intelligence becomes it becomes ancillary to the mind. It helps my mind achieve what it wants to achieve.
So the intelligence can get contaminated as well, can't it? If it's not trained.
If it's not trained. And the mind actually, it bases its decisions on the ahankar, on the sense of false ego. It's like if I identify as being someone's father, then based on that sense of identity, my mind will naturally accept, oh, I need to buy things for this person. And anything that troubles this person, I need to push away. When this ahankar is purified and one's real sense of ego is established, I am Krishna's servant, at that point, one's mind automatically begins to say, oh, I need to serve Krishna, I need to go to Mangalarati, I need to hear this. And anything that contradicts our devotional service, we feel like, no, I don't want to do that. Actually, for someone who is spontaneously a devotee in that way, who identifies as being a servant of Krishna, sometimes, their mind is actually their best compass. Because they just think, I want to serve, that's it. That's just where their mind naturally goes. If the mind is, and this is how the process of training works. Initially, one's false ego is focused on, certain material identity. The intelligence is trained by the spiritual master so that the mind can be engaged by the intelligence in devotional activities. When the mind develops a sense of taste in devotional service, it takes off on its own. It guides our desires to serve Krishna. You're feeling a little confused? But, sure. The spiritual master trains one's intelligence so that one's mind, which is accepting and rejecting from the point of view of our material identity, is forced by the trained intelligence to engage in devotional service. That engagement in devotional service sense of self and gives us the realization that actually I am a servant of Krishna. When that servitorship, that mood of servitorship is established, then my mind automatically begins to accept and reject based on that spiritual sense of identity. It becomes like bhoga, which is not offered to Krishna. No, I don't want it. I can't even stand the taste of bhoga. It becomes like, do I want to go to that cricket match? No, not really. It doesn't interest me anymore. As a kid, I would get extremely agitated. I would be watching cricket or something. My father would say, who cares? And he would just go away. And it would be like, who cares? I care. How can you say that? But a mind that is attached to devotional service it feels like, this is such a waste of time. This is not me. That's the realization. This is not me. I am actually someone different. And if someone has that established sense of, I am Krishna's servant, one's mind is the best friend in devotional service. And you often notice this with, the best training you can ever give kids is to give them that sense of I am Krishna's servant. Because in this world, the number of influences that are there are tremendous. You can't change that. Previously, people would say the best way of influencing children would be to be a good example at home. And the problem is that doesn't work anymore. The reason is that you have so many other influences that the child often prefers to the parent's example. And it's not a strong enough influence any longer. So what people now say is you make your child very attached to you. You don't necessarily train the intelligence of the child. You make the child attached to you. Their mind becomes attached to you. When their mind is attached to you, they want to become like you. And they identify with you. What does that mean? If we as parents identify as being devotees, or we as leaders identify as being devotees, those who are following us, children or what have you, also begin to identify as devotees. Their mind then becomes the best compass they have to navigate through life. Even if they make mistakes, which some may do, that you will find that they come back to Krishna. And you see this a lot, especially with a lot of Gurukulis actually. In their heart, Krishna is very deeply entered. And they may not subscribe to the form like the regulated forms of service that we have in the movement. But what you notice is that even as they are engaging in other activities, Krishna comes up in their topic, in their mind, in their words, in how they express themselves. And even at some stage they feel like, no, I just want to go back to hearing and chanting. They may not be very philosophically developed, but they just feel like, no, actually I just want to do kirtan. And some of those devotee children are among the strongest devotees that we can have. But the mind can be the best of friends if it has, this attachment in service. Even better if it has that sense of identification with Guru. So Prabhupada would actually say in some of his purports that, in some of his lectures he would say, why is it that the disciple just follows Guru? Whatever the Guru says stop this, the disciple stops it. The Guru says, do this, the disciple does it. And he says this is not possible to such a level of surrender if it is just, I want to advance or I want to do this. It is only possible, he says, if the disciple loves his spiritual master. That sense of love, that sense of attachment, that sense of identification with one's spiritual master produces a mindset that accepts and rejects as the spiritual master desires, as the spiritual master wants. And that is the cause for advancement in devotional service. Of course, the spiritual master also provides training of the intelligence, because sometimes that attachment is not strong enough. But here, what is being described is that the mind can be the best of friends if properly connected, or the worst of enemies. Actually, this verse says friend or enemy. Now, this verse will elaborate. Text 6. Bandhuratmatmanastasya yenatma manajitaha anatmanastu shatrutve varte tatmaiva shatruvat. Translation.
For him who has conquered the mind is the best of friends. But for one who has failed to do so, his mind will remain the greatest enemy.
The greatest of enemies. In the 11th canto, the realization of the Avanti Brahmana, his realization was the mind is the strongest of the strong, and its awesome power is terrifying. He describes the mind as being the cause of bringing practically everyone under his control, regardless of how physically or intellectually strong one is. The actual power of the mind is really tremendous, but made into a devotional mind can be the best of friends. So Prabhupada writes, the constitutional position of the living entity is to carry out the order of the superior. As long as one's mind remains an unconquered enemy, one has to serve the dictations of lust, anger, avarice, illusion, etc. But when the mind is conquered, one voluntarily agrees to abide by the dictation of the personality of Godhead who is situated within the heart of everyone as Paramatma. Real yoga practice entails meeting the Paramatma within the heart and then following his dictation. For one who takes to Krishna consciousness directly, so above the Ashtanga Yogi, perfect surrender to the dictation of the Lord follows automatically. Verse 7 continues this train of thought.
Question, Abhishek. How do you know when the mind's talking to you, and how do you know when Paramatma is talking to you?
Usually in our stage, it is not Paramatma. If we get some kind of direction, we can see if it tallies with the advice given to us by our mentors, spiritual master, and superiors. If it does, then it is, guidance by Krishna. See, the principle is, if one is, actually this is the statement that Prabhupada would use to explain that point. He would say, if someone is actually, fully engaged in devotional service, and their entire life is focused on pleasing and serving Krishna directly, it is actually quite possible that the directions they're getting are directions from Krishna. But still, they would go and confirm it with others. There are a few examples of this. Like if you look at Tamal Krishna Maharaj, when he had the desire to continue his university studies, or actually start his university studies and go on to a PhD, his thought was that actually the preaching that I'm doing, many academics are not taking seriously because I don't have an academic degree or qualifications. If I acquire it, I can influence them. But so his thought was like appropriate. Appropriate is the wrong word. I mean, it's a wonderful idea. But he didn't just go ahead with that idea. Rather, he consulted with his godbrothers who were deeply following Srila Prabhupada. Because if someone is identifying with Srila Prabhupada and deeply focuses their life on serving him, their minds and hearts are automatically filled with how would Srila Prabhupada do this? What would Srila Prabhupada say in this situation? And so Tamal Krishna Maharaj would consult with his senior godbrothers, get their understanding of what should be done or what should not be done, and follow through. So he would do that with any important decision. There's a very curious footnote there also, not to this pastime, but there's a footnote to, that Lord Nrsingadev in Mayapur, he was gifted different eyes initially. So there was a Mataji who came there and she had this, she heard Lord Nrsingadev and he told her, her eyes were not very good. Give me my eyes back, I'll give you your eyes back. And she heard it like a few times and she went to the Pujari and said, this is what I'm hearing. I think she might have gone to Jananivas Prabhu. Is that right? Jananivas Pankajangri Prabhu. And the first thing they did was find out whether she was mentally stable, but more importantly, whether she had been consistently practicing devotional service throughout her life. They found out that she had been a strong devotee, and she'd been engaged in full-time service her whole life, practically speaking. So with that background, they decided, okay, let's go through this process. Maybe it is the Lord's direction. They changed the Lord's eyes, her eyes improved. So those are the directions that one can have. Generally, if one is engaged in service and one gets ideas, I think this is what I need to do to take the next step, that is Krishna guiding one. Okay, so text 7. This describes the benefit of having a controlled mind. Chitatmana prashantasya paramatma samahitaha sitoshna sukha dukkeshu tata manapamanayoh. Translation.
For one who has conquered the mind, the super soul is already reached, for he has attained tranquility. In such a man, happiness and distress, hot and cold, honor and dishonor are all the same.
So here are further symptoms of the mind being controlled. Sitoshna sukha dukkeshu. He is equally happy, whether it is happiness, or material suffering that comes to him, whether he's being respected or disrespected, because his mind is controlled. His mind actually is situated internally, and at that point, this verse says, Paramatma is achieved. So complete control of the mind by absorption in Krishna is the way to achieve Paramatma. That's what this verse describes. Last sentence of the purport, Prabhupada says, this state is practical samadhi or absorption in the Supreme. And further up, Prabhupada says, the effect of controlling the mind is that one automatically follows the dictation of Paramatma or Super Soul, because this transcendental position is at once achieved by one who is in Krishna consciousness. The devotee of the Lord is unaffected by the dualities of material existence, namely distress, happiness, cold and heat, etc. Because this person who has controlled his mind, he is not seeing things externally. Everything is focused internally on, what Krishna has given him as an opportunity to grow within, because that's where his shelter is. And he's able to see every situation as being the gift of the Lord, and therefore he's able to be equal in all of these circumstances. And in that situation, the guidance he receives, the inspiration he receives, comes from Paramatma, from Krishna. Text 8. Jnana vijnana triptatma kutasto vijitendriyaha yukta iti uchyate yogi samallostrashma kanchanaha. Translation.
A person is said to be established in self-realization and is called a yogi or mystic when he is fully satisfied by virtue of acquired knowledge and realization. Such a person is situated in transcendence and self-control. He sees everything, whether it is pebbles, stones, or gold, as the same.
So continued description of the person who's qualified for the stage of Yoga Ruda. Jnana Vijnana Triptatma. He is satisfied in knowledge of Atma, and Vijnana, he is satisfied in realization of Atma. Kutastha, he is fixed in that position. Vijitendriya, he's controlled his senses. Yukta iti uchate yogi, samaloshrashma kanchana. Samaloshrashma, meaning he sees both gold and pebbles as being the same. Text 9. This verse describes a higher level of achievement than the previous verse. Suhurin mitrari udasina madhyastha dvesha bandhushu sadhushu apicha papeshu samabhuddhir vishishyate. Translation.
A person is considered still further advanced when he regards honest well-wishers, affectionate benefactors, the neutral mediators, the envious friends and enemies, the pious and the sinners, all with an equal mind.
Now this stage is actually really incredibly difficult. The word suhurin, Prabhupada translates it as being an honest well-wisher. What that word means, suhrit, means one who acts for other people's welfare just because that is their inherent nature. They are honestly well-wishers. They just care for everybody by their own nature. The word mitra, Prabhupada here translates it to as affectionate benefactors. What it means is a person who, because of affection for an individual, wants to do good for them. So affectionate benefactors. The word udasina, the word ari. Ari here, Prabhupada translates it, Prabhupada is not yet translated here, as envious. But ari means someone who wants to harm somebody because of a lack of those well-wishing feelings. Udhasina means that somebody who is neutral among two opposing parties. So here Prabhupada translates it as being someone who's neutral. Madhyastha means someone who is in the middle of two arguing parties. The first one is just two opposing parties. They're not necessarily arguing. But Madhyastha means someone who's trying to bring together people in an argument. So here Prabhupada translates it as mediators. So that's Madhyastha. Dveshya refers to someone who should be hated because they hate everybody else. So for example, to take the worst possible example, you take your dictators or people who actually are trying to hurt everybody else. So in the Bhagavatam there's a verse which says that even a sadhu feels happy when a scorpion, a snake, or some such envious creature is killed. But here, what is being described is a level where for themselves, they don't necessarily hate or love such an individual. They see this person as being equal to everybody else from their own personal point of view. Dvesha, bandhushu means a relative. So here Prabhupada translates it that this is being friends. Sadhushu means a pious person, and a sinner means someone who's obviously sinful. Samabuddhir vishishyate. Such a person is more advanced when he is able to see all these people of different mentalities. People who have affection for us, people who don't have affection for us, people who hate us, hate everybody, all equally. Now this is the hardest thing. And Arjuna will later say that this stage is practically impossible for me to achieve. This stage is the result of the most advanced perfection in yoga. But Arjuna will say that, Krishna, what you're describing for me seems completely impractical. And that comes in verse 33.
So is it like different to everyone?
No, they don't see it from... Because if someone is affectionate to me, for example, my heart warms to them. What's such a nice person? If someone is, terrible or, has a bad mood, then I think this person, there's something wrong with them. They may be doing service, they may be doing anything, but they don't behave properly. I think in these terms because I'm dealing with my personal experience of them. I'm dealing with how my mind feels about them. But for someone who's able to see each of these individuals as being spirit souls, and they're just conditioned in a body, they actually have a vision of their spirit soul. They don't identify that individual with the emotions that they're manifesting. They understand that this person is manifesting love, and that's just how their mind has been conditioned. This person is manifesting a certain amount of... But as a spirit soul, they have a general affection for everybody. It doesn't mean indifference. But when someone experiences, in normal relationships, when someone expresses affection or, I love you so much or you're so wonderful, they're not affected by these statements. Or I hate you, they're not affected by these statements. They see both parties equally.
So they don't react or respond to?
They respond to the spirit soul's need. And that's what actually Krishna does. If you look at Putana, when Putana came to kill Krishna, if someone came to kill us, would we be handing out a Bhagavad Gita to them? Or standing around for prasadam? If someone really, even worse, if someone tried to kill if a person tried to kill a mother's children, how do you think that mother would react? Is it possible that they can feel even slight amounts of compassion for that person? It's an extremely elevated stage. But they see that spirit soul as being in need of... It's not that they would let their child be killed. That's not the point. The point is they don't feel that animosity towards that individual. They don't take it personally. They see that this person is conditioned. You deal with that situation practically. But everything they do is for the purpose of dealing with that spirit soul. So when Putana came to kill Krishna, Krishna saw the intention behind the activity. Not the intention, he saw just the activity. She's coming as a mother. He took that and he gave her the highest form of liberation. But Krishna didn't take the part that she was coming to kill him. And so when, even on the battlefield of Kurukshetra, there were people who tried to harm Krishna, who tried to hate him. There were people who actually had a lot of affection for Krishna, even on the opposing side. All of them achieved liberation. But according to their respective moods, according to the kind of relationship they wanted with the Lord. Those who dealt with Krishna, as a neutral person, they achieved Brahman liberation. But those who had some feeling of affection, like Bhurishrava, he achieved Vishnu's abode. When Bhurishrava was about to die on the battlefield, his arm had been cut off by Arjuna. And Krishna just stood in front of him and said, you worshipped Vishnu all your life. Now go to my abode. And you will achieve a four-arm form there. And devotees like Bhishma Deva, Krishna was personally present for them. But he didn't take their negative or, as a personal thing. But he was acting for the benefit of everybody as they wanted. So, therefore Krishna is called Yogeshwara, the master of the yogis. But this stage of yoga is actually a very, very elevated stage of yoga. It's very difficult for a conditioned soul to achieve it. But at the highest echelons of perfection, it's possible. Okay. So the first 9 verses, therefore, have described the qualification to practice Ashtanga Yoga. Symptoms of also the perfected soul have been described. Text number 10. Text number 10 through to 32 now describe the process of Dhyana Yoga, which is the last 4 stages of perfection. Text number 10. Yogi yunjita satatam atmanam rahasi stitaha ekaki yata chittatma nirashir aparigraha. Translation.
The transcendentalist should always engage his body, mind and self in relationship with the Supreme. He should live alone in a secluded place and should always carefully control his mind. He should be free from desires and feelings of possessiveness.
So the phrase Yogi Yunjita Satatam, Prabhupada translates it here as a transcendentalist should engage his body, mind and self in relationship to Krishna. Point is that he should constantly be practicing what he is doing and connected to Krishna. Atmanam, he should keep himself rahasi sthitaha, in seclusion. Ekaki, rahasi means in a secluded place, ekaki means alone, no other company. Yata chittatma, his chitta, his mind should always be controlled. What goes in, what goes out is very carefully controlled. Nirashir, without specific ashi. Asha means desire, devoid of specific desires around himself. Aparigraha, he doesn't think of anything as being his personal possession. Text 11 and 12. Now this describes the environment in which this practitioner situates himself. Shuchau deshe pratishtapya stiram asanam atmanaha nati uchritam nati nicham chailanjina kushotaram tatraikagram mana kritva yata chittendriya kriyaha upavishyasane yunjad yogam atma vishuddhaye. Translation.
To practice yoga, one should go to a secluded place and should lay kusha grass on the ground and then cover it with a deer skin and a soft cloth. The seat should be neither too high nor too low and should be situated in a sacred place. The yogi should then sit on it very firmly and practice yoga to purify the heart by controlling his mind, senses and activities and fixing the mind on one point.
So the phrase suchi means purified. So Prabhupada in the purport writes, sacred place, suchi, refers to places of pilgrimage. In the translation it's been written as secluded place. The word suchi actually refers to sacred place. Sacred place refers to places of pilgrimage. In India, the yogis, the transcendentalists or devotees all leave home and reside in sacred places such as Prayag, Mathura, Vrindavan, Rishikesh, Haridwar, and in solitary practice yoga, where sacred rivers like Yamuna and Ganges flow. Sorry?
Just have a question about the deer skin rub. I've always wanted to know this. Are they supposed to, how do they get it? Because obviously in Yama Niyama it says non-violent.
Kshatriyas, when they practice hunting, they kill the deer. That's allowed in the scriptures. And when they kill the deer, their skin is taken out and given to yogis for their practice.
Right. But they don't eat the meat?
No. They don't eat the meat.
Kill the deer and use the
The yogis don't kill the deer. The Kshatriyas do. Because that is part of because the Kshatriyas need to keep up their martial training.
Right.
And so they need moving targets.
Right. So it's to practice their aim, basically.
So you often hear of Kshatriyas going to the forest and chasing after deer or even wild animals.
Right.
So that was accepted practice.
So I've just always wondered about deer skin.
Is it also the case where the deer leaves its body by natural causes and then you can use the skin as well? Is that also relevant in this?
Possible, but I wouldn't know that detail. Usually Prabhupada speaks about, like hunting. In Bhagavatam or in other places when there's references to Kshatriyas going out hunting, Prabhupada comments that this is accepted practice. So, and I think he also, in some place, he says that skin is given then for such yoga practice. I don't know if once a deer dies whether the skin becomes contaminated or not, that I'm not sure. But the reason, like you often hear of hermits wearing like black deer skin. But deer skin was chosen because it's a natural repellent of various insects and creatures in the forest.
Wow.
So it says that the deer skin repels snakes, for example.
There's a practical reason.
It's a very, very practical reason, yeah. And what they do is they normally use kusha grass. They make a seed out of... Durva grass, right? Darba. Is it Durva or Darba? What is liked by Ganesh, for example?
That is orange.
Oh, it's not the same thing?
No, not cleansing.
Okay.
That
So,
is, this is not cleansing. Udaka is nothing but a grey one.
no. This is what you just said. Darba grass. So it's kusha grass. You actually use it in yajna performances. Like some of you may have seen, they put it like as a ring, particularly on male fingers. So that is the kusha grass. They make a seat out of that grass and they cover it with deer skin around. So it's comfortable, but not sleeping like comfortable.
Right.
They can sit on it for a long time. The prescription's not too high, not too low. It's comfortable. They can sit and meditate comfortably for a long period of time. That's the idea. And the other important thing is that it is their own seat. They have to make it themselves. The reason is that if they happen to take, oh, here's a seat, yogi, that practitioner might have just gone to take a bath. And if they go and take a seat, that the practitioner will feel disturbed. And that person's disturbance causes a practice in one's own practice.
Yeah.
So therefore one makes one's own arrangement. The practice is that one cleans the area oneself, one would make one's seat oneself, one doesn't depend on external sources. One just makes a seat and then sits on it. So, Suchau Deshe Pratisthapya, being situated in a purified place, Stiram Asanam Atmanaha. It is a firm seat. Atmana, his own seat. Nati Uchritam, Nati Nicham. It's not too high, not too low. Again, it's for comfort, so that it can be sustained for a long period of time. Chailanjana Kushotaram. Kusha grass, it is covered with deer skin. Tatra, in that place, ekagram mana kritva. He makes his mind fixed in one place. Yata chittendriya kriyaha. He focuses his chitta, his senses, and his activities. Upavishya asane yunjat yogam atma vishuddhaye. He begins to bring his mind to meditate on Paramatma within the heart. Text 13 and 14. These verses describe his posture. Samam kaya shiro grivam dharayan nachalam stiraha sampreksha nasikagram swam dishaschanavalokayan prashantatma vigatabir brahmachari vrate stitaha manasamyamya machitto yuktasita matparaha. Translation.
One should hold one's body, neck, head erect in a straight line and stare steadily at the tip of the nose. Thus, with the unagitated, subdued mind, devoid of fear, completely free from sex life, one should meditate upon me within the heart and make me the ultimate goal of life.
Mana samyamya machitto, by putting his mind upon me. Remember, we discussed how in those 4 stages, once pratyahara happens, dharana means meditation on Krishna, his whole form. Then dhyana becomes meditation on individual parts of the Lord's form, on his feet, calves, knee, thighs, waist, etc. And we discussed how in the 11th canto, it's described that by meditating on each